Welcome to our latest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today it's actually going to be an interesting discussion with Dr. Carmen Geha, who is a well-known scholar activist. And she has worked in leadership development and scholar activism, especially in the academic sector in Lebanon when she was in her long tenure at the American University of Beirut. And currently she has her own consulting firm and company in Barcelona, Spain, and that's where she's talking to me from. Welcome, Carmen, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diab. Thank you for having me.
Carmen, I decided to invite you to this podcast after reading your very interesting paper with other prominent scholar activists at AUB, some of whom have already also left the country at this time. And the article discussed scholar activism as a way of healing in times of crisis. So before we start first, can you just introduce yourself and your history in doing scholar activism at AUB?
Yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, it's nice to be on a physician's podcast. I am a political scientist, so pretty far from all you medical professionals. And yeah, we stumbled upon this idea of collective healing as something that emerged out of many years of work and not something we intended to do. I should say that this article, I'm third author on it, together with my colleagues and dear friends, Professor Charlotte Karam, who is now endowed professor of human resources at University of Ottawa, and Professor Lina Dao, who is professor of organization psychology at the BI Norwegian Business School. We were together for many years as partners and friends and activists at the American University of Beirut. They were in the business school. I was associate professor of public administration. And together through many, and with many others as well, through many junctures in Lebanon, be it the recurrent political stalemate, be it the war next door in Syria and the Syrian refugee crisis, be it attacks on women and youth organization, leading up to the Thawra, pandemic, economic collapse, and unfortunately the Beirut Port explosion, we found ourselves needing and wanting to step out of our sort of typical job description and do the kind of work that was needed to heal ourselves and heal the community. And unfortunately, now 4 years later, we see that those processes and that reflection are still so much needed given what is happening in Lebanon right now with the war. So unfortunately, it's as if those small ways of coming together didn't end with what we thought would be the Beirut blast, but rather, continued to manifest in different ways. So that's a little bit the story. Yes, and yeah.
Yep, and you were how many years were you at AUB for?
I was at AUB full-time for about 10 years. I was assistant professor, and then I became tenured associate professor 2 months before the explosion. So all in all, about 8 to 10 years.
About 8 to 10 years, yeah. And you witnessed during these 8 to 10 years, you witnessed some of the creeping, I guess we'll discuss what creeping crises mean, but you witnessed the revolution, the banking crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the port explosion. And I think that's what prompted you to potentially leave the country afterwards. One of the things that prompted you to do that. But in this article, you explain creeping crisis. Can you explain to us what creeping crisis means in the academic circles and why Lebanon is such a powerful example of one of those?
Yeah, I will explain it, but I will say that it's not that I would witnessed those events in Lebanon, but that our scholarship was kind of embedded within that context and geared towards it. So everything I did in political science and public administration was really to mobilize whatever we do in research and teaching towards that end. And really American University Beirut, just outside its doorstep, there is an array of suffering and injustices even before this war. And so many of us at the campus kind of dedicated their career and the knowledge for the purpose of those events. So it's not that I was in the classroom witnessing suffering. We were on the streets, our lives were affected, our students, their parents were enduring all of that. And the idea of a creeping crisis borrowed from organization psychology is crisis that is about to erupt, about to burst. And it bursts and it remains unaddressed. So really, if we think of any problem in Lebanon, from electricity to displacement to women's rights to war and conflict, are all the results of these crises that seem to be dormant and then explode. And really, the best visual for that is the port explosion, because we realized in its aftermath that for many years there were explosives at the port, disregarded up until the moment of the explosion. And until now, the explosion has not been treated. So a creeping crisis is something that is not, it's not a sudden disaster. It's not like we wake up and suddenly there is a problem on the neighborhood, but something that continues to be creeping. And what that does is really it distracts us from being able to handle any of them, because they emerge and then they continue, they exacerbate.
Right, exactly. And you have to deal with it because even though you're teaching at the American University of Beirut inside its campus, but most of your life is actually outside of the campus and in conjunction and relationship with all the people that are being affected by these crises.
Yes, and actually, one of the faculty statements that were issued in the early days of the October Revolution was saying, today the classroom has become the street, right? And our job is to be on the street, because a university that preaches care and diversity and democracy and participation ought to also, model that. So for us, it was always this purposeful blurring of the lines. Why are we studying what we are studying? We want to contribute to a greater change, which of course we couldn't very much. But we'll discuss that later.
Exactly. And for people who don't know, I mean, I just want to explain that when the 2019 crisis happened, one, electricity and water were an issue in Lebanon, but they got much worse afterwards, and people were affected by them. You had to have a generator in your building to be able to get electricity. And people would say, "Oh, well, we can get our own generator, we can get our own water." But then, as you discuss, suddenly you're like, "Well, we can't protect ourselves because also the state is not protecting us because there's explosives at the port that nobody told us about." So it's like this is one of the examples that happened.
Yeah, and the generators, of course, the reference on that is Professor Najat Saliba, who is now a member of parliament, who is an atmospheric chemist whose whole life has been on this, diesel fuel, saying this is going to make people sick. And Lebanon now has one of the highest cancer rates in all of West Asia. So another kind of creeping crisis. It's like it surprises you, but when you look at it, you think, oh, we should have known that.
Right, exactly. And so in this paper, you argue that crises create material, emotional, and relational ruptures. What did those ruptures look like inside academic communities in Lebanon, especially at AUB, I guess, where you were?
Yeah, so that paper was really an opportunity together with Charlotte and Lena to try to put into words this experience, because for me we had sought out to try to create a change in the outside system, to try to work on some kind of a recovery after the explosion. The explosion created material rupture in the university itself. Some offices were broken, but also in the homes and buildings of our students, their parents, our own houses. People were sick. There were 6,000 people wounded in a very small city, Lebanon. So there was material, physical damage and relational rupture. How do you go back to doing business as usual? So we didn't. We tried to put everything that we had worked on already around scholar activism into action in that moment, to come together first to support each other and kind of touch each other and say, don't worry, we're here. And second, to try to work on a recovery around us in the city. And what we realized with time is that that was creating a new kind of work in our life, which is an institutional work of healing for the collective. Because what happened to our students and faculty and community was a collective trauma. It was not an individual incident, and it shouldn't be treated as an individual incident. And also, I would argue to say, as much as you try to fix it individually, go to therapy, cheer yourself up, go do yoga, the solution really lies in the collective. So that article tried to break down, okay, what is it that happened and what kind of work was needed? And then what is that? Why is that sort of work invisible in academia, right? Like that is not work that goes on your CV. It's not a professional service. It's not a publication. But all of this work that people were spending, from 6 a.m. till midnight together trying to do something. So we tried to bring it to life in the article.
Right, which is important because in academia, traditionally, it's more like you want to publish, publish, publish so you can get promoted over time and get more recognized and stuff like that. But people do not talk about this work in the community between the scholars themselves at the university supporting each other.
Absolutely. Actually, many advice that young scholars are given is to avoid service work, right? To stay away from trouble, to don't do this, pretend you haven't seen it, and kind of focus on your own publications,
Right.
which of course is interesting because when you publish, you're told to also look at a gap in the literature. So for us, it was always not a gap in written, but a gap in suffering. Who's not doing work on community nursing? Someone was doing it at AUB. Who's not doing work on the environmental impact? We want to know what is in the air that we're breathing following the explosion. We want to support our young students. This was the gap that later became also a research trajectory, but that was not born from the library, that was born from the street, really.
Right, exactly.
I spent a lot of years on the street.
Right, exactly. And I think there's still some activists at AUB who are still spending a lot of time on the streets.
I think, to be honest, leaving AUB, and we can talk about this, I think we have the highest concentration of this sort of academics in any campus that I've seen in the world. I cannot claim I know all campuses or
Right.
all disciplines, but I would say really from our faculty of engineering, and look, I'm not there anymore. I say our because for me, these people are really heroes and a model of what professors should do, from environment, our colleagues in business across the university, people working on urban today, monitoring all the destruction of the Israeli aggressions across Lebanon, putting those maps out there. I think that AUB has a very high concentration of this type of scholarly work. And this is what we were trying to say is important, not just for the research itself, but for the community. At least it was in our experience.
Exactly, because data is very important too in these situations. So that makes me pivot into it's a good part to ask this question now, which is what is scholar activism and how is it different from traditional academic work or public advocacy?
Mhm. So this is a very heated debate. And I know also in the US and especially following the last 3 years of student protests in many parts of the world, right? This question has come to center stage, right? Is a scholar that also does activism, are they biased? Should activism be allowed? Who defines it? So in our work, really, scholar activism is scholarly work that is aimed at social justice. What is scholarly work, right? It's three tracks. It's teaching, developing material, being in the classroom, assessing. It's developing knowledge, publishing, promoting that. And it is service, sitting on committees, running departments. And if all these three services are also aimed towards social justice, impacting the community, then that's a form of scholar activism. And for me, everything I've done has been embedded in this, even before I knew what it meant. So my BA year at AUB, there was the Hariri assassination. I mean, that changed my undergraduate studies. In 2006, I graduated. There was the 2006 Israeli war in Lebanon. That changed the way when I went to do my PhD, the first semester, the Arab uprisings happened. So I went to Tunisia and Libya. Everything, all along the way while studying, there was something happening that kind of made me think, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's to maybe contribute to a broader perspective. So scholar activist for us was really work aimed at social justice, social change. And in the article, we say it is a purposeful blurring of this research and agenda together. Rather than separating, it is asking the scholar, why are you doing this knowledge? Whom does it serve? And can you do it in a way that also serves a community?
Right. So basically, because a lot of people think about it as more of an individualistic thing where, all right, I'm going to publish to serve myself and promote myself, but it's more, I'm publishing not only to promote myself, but also to help the community and help others. I want to make sure that my publications are helping the community around me.
Yeah, and you can do both. I mean,
Exactly.
I was the first woman to be tenured in my department to become associate professor in a fast track. And I say this as an example. It's not that I don't think we should publish. We should publish, but it is that working when you are in a creeping crisis context and outside there's so much suffering, rather than isolating yourself in a library, you can open up. And I think a lot of people at AUB and on other campuses at AUB in Lebanon, they do that. And people think sometimes scholar activism is like someone shouting on the street. It's that. I did a lot of that. But it's also work. The article talks about, work. It's producing knowledge. It's creating committees. It's reaching out to students. It's public engagement. It's constructive work. It's not only confrontational work and rejecting the system, which again, I've done a lot about and I would do it again. But scholar activism, protest is one aspect. And there's an array of things that the article talks about, such as public engagement and advocacy and producing, research that benefits the community.
Right. And I remember one activist when I was living in Lebanon at the time was when electricity was gone and there were a lot of problems during the economic crisis. And I think pictures or photos of the fishermen on the Beirut waterfront were all posted on the waterfront with like a history of each one of them. That was, I guess, a form of activism just to show that these people who they are, what they're doing for the community, and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's very important to highlight this kind of work because, again, sometimes activism is mistaken only with protest, but constructive work, right? Generative activism, such as documenting war crimes, documenting human rights abuses, enlisting in your coursework contemporary things that are happening, artifacts, creating coalitions and initiatives that bring together not only in the wake of explosion. If you want to pass legislation today in Lebanon on environmental protection, you are a professor, you have the scientific knowledge, you need to come out and talk to people who are in parliament, to business people. So all of this work is activism. It's scholarly work that's embedded in a greater impact. That could be protest is one way and could be generative also when needed. And what happened after the port explosion was not protest, was generative. We needed to rebuild like where we were sitting.
Right, exactly. Rebuild where we were sitting and also maybe rebuild our families or what happened because a lot of people lost family members or got family members injured during that time. And that brings me to the next question, which is people think, especially in the West, like, yeah, we're like it's individualism and we can heal on our own and stuff like that. But you talk about the concept of collective healing. How do you define that and how do you do it, I guess, in practice?
Yeah, that was the biggest, and now because it's been 4 years that I'm outside Lebanon, really that has been the biggest lesson for me. And it also, in a sad way, like changed the way I thought when I left Lebanon that we had failed because I was thinking of the external. And after all these years and after so many conversations with the co-authors who are friends, I realized that it's not always the external that can be subject to change. It's not always that our activism will change, and not just in Lebanon, anywhere in the world. It's not always that the activism is going to fix a policy or change a government. But it could be that this activism creates the spaces that we need not just to survive, but to be able to heal and stand on our feet again and create again. And this was really the finding that we synthesized in the article. Because the trauma and the grief was collective, the healing also had to be collective. Like, how can I teach a class when the student says, sorry, I can't because my hand not, has been, cut off. So, but I still want to attend because I want to hear you because it's really important. How should I say? Oh no, you should do an exam. Like there needed to be a collective strategy of understanding, of solidarity. And it's the same with the faculty members. And I think that was when I started to shift from we didn't change Lebanon into hold on a second, but we kind of helped ourselves and changed ourselves and restored a sense of dignity and felt that what was happening was not just to us. Imagine in 6 months, in addition to the pandemic, when I left Lebanon, people tell me, oh, the pandemic was horrible. Imagine during the pandemic, food prices go up 600,000%. Your parents lose your pension. Your salary is not enough to pay the fuel. And then your city explodes. So this is a collective healing that was needed to address a collective injustice that started out anger and then ended with a sense of like, you know what, we're okay if we're together. But all of that was work. All of that was not, it was pandemic, so it was not, I'm going to say it in Arabic, نلتقى على فنجان قهوة نلتقى على كاس. It was work, it was scheduling, it was meeting, it was writing, it was synthesizing, it was, trying to flatten the hierarchy. This is not about if you are a chair or a full professor or a student. This is about the city. And in the city, we are all citizens, and in the university as well.
Right. And yeah, it's very important. I think that's why like a lot of people like to be in Lebanon or go to Lebanon sometimes just because there's so much, people are
Yes.
always together. And I think part of it is all the injustices that people have faced. You have to be together to be able to overcome them. And this is part of the collective healing process that you just discussed.
Yes, and this is like in literature, like epistemic privilege, right? This is like I know what's going on because I experienced it. So that there was a lot of that in the wake of the explosions. Like I see you and I get it, just by asking where's your house? Oh, mine was in this area, that area. And from that came the need to do something activist oriented. And then from that we stumbled upon really healing. And people were saying, like, yeah, I feel better by doing this.
Exactly, because you also feel that you're helping yourself, but also you're helping your whole community at the same time, helping other people heal, which actually makes you feel better too at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to
And
ask
when the
you,
outside is so oppressive, like it is in Lebanon, it's so corrupt, it's so bad, it also helps you feel that you're creating the kind of community you want to strive for, right? You're creating the movement that you want to live in.
right, as if you're creating your own bubble of a community inside the big potentially injustice that you are in at this point. Uh,
Correct.
so you mentioned flatten hierarchies. So
Mm.
what does the term flatten hierarchies mean in academia, especially during moments of crisis?
Yeah, so it's in the article, like we name it as a sub-process. So we really theorize about this. Academia is a very hierarchical institution for the right reasons. There are a lot of checks and balances. It's also a profession where there could be a lot of unchecked power, right? Just because somebody has rank. And in the moment of a collective trauma, in the moment of a collective grief, you can't create a crisis response or an activist group that is as hierarchical. It doesn't work. By virtue, it requires an ethic of care. And I would encourage listeners and yourself also to check out the latest Journal of Business Ethics curated by Dr. Karam, and many people have written on that. And there's an article by Dr. Fida Afyouni, who's associate provost at the UB now, تحكي عن ethic of care, right? But so by nature, an ethic of care in a moment of the world collapsed cannot be we are sitting and Mr. Chairperson is going to speak and Dr. So and so is going to disrupt him or her, and there's going to be like measurable indicators of you only can vote if you are in that moment. You need to flatten the hierarchy, as in invite everybody to participate regardless of their age and rank. You're creating a participatory platform. So there has to be a flattening of hierarchies. This also means that you are seeking knowledge in places that the academy doesn't regard as important, right? Academia thinks we are the knowledge, but maybe a civil society organization has knowledge. Maybe a nurse on the street can tell us what's happening. Maybe the grandma that, is under the rubble has something to say. Maybe the student. So flattening the hierarchy is a purposeful effort to say, yeah, we are all academics and we want to be professors and we are, but in this moment, this is not where your legitimacy comes from. In this moment, your legitimacy comes from care and listening. And if you can participate through your expertise, ahla wa sahla, because you know the solution to this issue and you've researched, how to fix the roadblock, and you understand the impact of asbestos on our lungs, and you have something to say, but not coming from a place of hierarchy. So really the purposeful effort to think beyond hierarchy is to tell people things like, here right now it's not doctor professor, here right now we're trying to think together what every person can bring to the table so that we can create a movement that mobilizes everybody, because what happened to everybody, not just to the university. We are one actor. Or in fact, if you look back at that phase, yani, there were thousands of initiatives. Everybody was getting out of their way, right? If you are a business restaurant, you're letting people in. If you are a nurse, if you are a pharmacist, right? So also keeping the humility of the campus. We are one of many, and that is how you flatten really hierarchies and listen to what's happening around and invite people to participate.
Right. And that's important, especially in these times. But also, I think it's always important to listen to other people, because even though you may know the solutions, but always you get information that probably your eyes are not open to, or something like that, that will help you actually manage things better and publish better, actually, even afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the whole what universities are pushing their faculty to think about, right? In terms of impact, co-creation, reaching out to qualitative data. All of this is embedded in what? And like thinking that you are part of a broader ecosystem and not thinking alone. There's nothing wrong with thinking alone, and knowledge that is produced from the library and theory books are very important, but we also need the other sources of knowledge, and it shouldn't be looked down on. Like if someone, like you're saying, listens and co-creates and works with different stakeholders, that knowledge is equally, if not more important, especially in creeping crisis. Maybe if we were in a perfect world, we can all sit and read, but if you are at a campus like UB or SG or Lebanese or any of those universities, you have to. You have to.
Right? You have to be part of the community. So how can professors, students, staff, and researchers like create spaces where titles matter less than solidarity?
Mm. Everywhere in the world. No, I think like methodologically, the how-to is really to become well tuned into co-creation. It's not the same as consultation. It's not the same as collecting data. It's not the same as running a focus group. Co-creation starts from what is the question that I should be asking? Not because Dr. Diab has identified this important question, let's study sectarianism in Lebanon. No, but what should be the question? Okay, I'm gonna go ask people, what is it that's important to you? What should I be studying as a scholar? So co-creating the questions with the community that is in distress. This applies to business as much as public health, as much to mental health. What are those SMEs on the street in Lebanon suffering from, right? What research could help them? And people were telling us, oh, we'd love to learn about, benchmarking with other disasters in the world. Okay, we'll go research that. We'd love to know, how to seek justice for the families of the victims. Let's go research, judiciary hearings for victims of man-made disasters. So how do professors work with the community is to ask the community, what do you need? And how can my expertise, if I'm trained in a discipline or in a methodological discipline, how can I help you as a statistician? And then to use that process throughout the publication, throughout the research journey, and not to think that just because a publication is published, that's going to make impact, but rather to weave in think of the publication as a project. What are you going to do with this? You've now identified the top 3 reasons of corruption. Okay, great. What are you going to do with this? Who is your stakeholders? Who are you talking to? And do they know you a priori? Or you're going to jump and say, I am professor, because a lot of the knowledge is out there. So, but if you work in co-creation early on, your audience will be part of that project, will carry it forward, right? And hopefully will use this knowledge to further their own demands and advocacy. So I think really delving into co-creation, I tell my students, extractivist is here and co-creation is there, or the opposite, extractivist co-creation on a spectrum. So extractivist goes and collect data from poor people somewhere. And co-creation says, I'm going to live with these people, see what they need and how we can work together. And think also that they have knowledge. They have knowledge from their experience, from their ancestry, from their perspective. It's not only I'm bringing knowledge.
Right.
Academia is a discipline. It's a way of doing research. It's not there is not a solution for this. There's validity in all of the fields, but it's a way of living. It's investigating something, no, in a rigorous way.
It is, exactly. And these individuals supported to know that they live this life, right? They're living there. So they have knowledge that they can actually give you to help them out. And I think, as you said, like when you do your publication, you've already involved the community in it. So you can have more impactful change rather than just publishing it without involving the community and then be like, it doesn't have anything to do with us. We're not going to use it to change anything from our standpoint.
Yeah. And community doesn't have to be the whole world, right? It doesn't have to be that we are going to fix the United Nations system. But like a lot of my previous work was working on protests in Lebanon and movement dynamics. And that was always embedded with movement organizers, of whom I was one. So we were thinking, okay, what do we need to, where are the gaps? What did we learn? Try to publish that. Some people like what you say, some people don't like it. You build on it. But it's part of a life cycle. It's not just that I am answering to the leader in the field who's sitting somewhere in the UK. I have no problem with the UK. I did my PhD in Scotland. But no, it's speaking to someone beyond the most cited author. There's people who are going to use this or criticize it, which is great, but you create conversation from your research. You're not thinking alone.
Right, exactly. And there's been some initiatives that you discussed too, like Khadet Beirut and others. So how did that initiative, can you discuss that initiative and how it actually weaves into what we were discussing together right now?
Yeah, so Khadet Beirut brought all of our pain and suffering and all of our learning together. I was born the next day after the port explosion. From myself, Dr. Najat Saliba, Dr. Nahad Doumit, Charlotte Karam, Nina Daou, Iman Wahid, Alain Daou. We were a large group of professors who had been doing this kind of work before. They were scholar activists. They were people whose work was embedded in a community that was suffering. Well, the explosion really, did this thing like I was saying. We just looked at each other and we knew that we had to. So we organized like 4 groups, each group that was working on a particular recovery and putting the knowledge out there and embedding itself with what was happening with civil society and all of that around SMEs, business school professors, around environmental health, around public health, particularly with the hospital in Karantina. And try to mobilize its own expertise together what was happening in civil society to react to the port explosion and say, this is not okay. And to put out there, a collective narrative that this was really not okay. And we cannot rebuild back a creeping crisis by moving on to the next, because we realized it was a creeping crisis. Unfortunately, in Lebanon, It's not that we moved on, it's that another creeping crisis crept, and another one, and another one, and another one. So this is the tragedy of Lebanon, is that you can't put off any of the fires. They may fade, but another one emerges. But Khaled Beirut, yes, was a scholar activist network. We mobilized like 200 people. There were so many people in the diaspora who connected with this activist thing, even though they weren't seeing themselves as activists on the street. But they're like, oh, you know what? I'm an expert. Like, I can cook for Lebanon. I can write a paper for Lebanon. I can, give a class to the students for Lebanon, mental health and all of that.
Yeah, which you involved them even though they were far away, but probably also it helps them because it's part of their collective healing, I guess, because they're far away. They're like, we can't do anything about this, but we're so worried about what's going on. So that's a way for them to contribute to the situation and help out.
That was the thing we heard the most.
Yep.
Like, I feel healing, I feel seen.
Exactly. And so, as we said, it's creeping crises, like one crisis after the other. So, do people get burned out? Like, what are the risks of burnout, compassion fatigue, I guess, disappointment? When you keep working as scholar activists, you keep working on unresolved crises or creeping or new crises that develop.
Yeah, I'm gonna say my experience in this, but I don't want it to overshadow, because there are a lot of people that didn't burn out. There are a lot of people that continue in Lebanon, and they make the fight worth it. And yeah, but in my experience, you do burn out. And actually, Dr. Joelle Abi Rashid is putting together an anatomy of the collapse. She's professor of history and medicine at AUB now. One of the chapters I'm writing is specifically on this, is speaking to people who were in that experience, who feel either that they must pass the baton to someone else. But anyway, you can read it. For me, yes, you do burn out. It's without a question, because it's creeping crisis. One of its features is uncertainty. There is a limit to how much a human being can live with constant uncertainty, increasing from places you weren't expecting it. Like, you can live with a currency crisis, maybe electricity, add to it fuel, then a bunch of corrupt politicians unwilling to investigate the explosion. Then you say it's okay, and a war starts, and then something else happens. So I think the scholar activist in the academy should also give themselves a chance to do the traditional academic role, which is to step back, to breathe, to take a sabbatical, to teach a class. I found it impossible to keep on going given the setbacks in the country. And so, yes, the research and myself and people I talk to, yes, there is disenfranchisement. There is migration from the activist sphere geographic. So I'm in Spain, I'm not in Lebanon. You leave, or you stay in the country, but you withdraw from the space of activism because it's too much, right? And there's also a realization. It's not only burnout, it's maturity. So you do something today, you advocate, you protest, you make a change, assuming someone's gonna listen. Our politicians don't listen. This is recent, the current president and prime minister and this wonderful government, but my whole life they don't listen. So the first time they don't listen, maybe they'll change, then you engage, and then you realize your activism is falling on not just deaf ears, but culprit ears. Like, where is the port explosion? It's gonna be 6 years this year.
Right.
Is it possible? Has it happened anywhere in the world that a port explodes, no one goes to jail? So yes, it is a deep sense of burnout, but perhaps it's a necessary part of the journey of healing as well, is to also realize your capability. And that's why I told you, like, when I changed my gaze from the external and look internal, I felt we did the right thing for us, and that we did heal from something. No, we talked about it a lot. But the burnout came from the lack of any kind of change in Lebanon. In fact, it worsened.
Exactly. And one of it is actually, I know Joseph Khoury worked with you on this article.
Yes, he did. And I think he also edited this psychiatry journal. He's wonderful.
Yeah. And he once told me, I was doing a podcast with him about the port explosion, and that's one of the things he told me was, if you cannot know who the culprits are, then people feel you're not achieving justice. And that affects actually the healing process. So people don't heal as well, and they get burned out partially because you're not achieving justice by what you did.
Correct. You can't live with the perpetrators forever.
Exactly.
But yes, but it doesn't mean that burnout. I also think burnout is the end of the story. It doesn't mean that. It could also mean, these are fights that will be with us our whole lives. So it could also mean that it's someone else's turn now, maybe in a different way. Some people we work with thought that parliament is the space for fighting. Some people thought, I'll leave the country. What I thought, I'll try from diaspora. It's something I never tried. Some people stayed on the campus. Some people took on leadership roles, and some people retreated to take care of themselves and their families. And that's also okay. Like burnout is not necessarily declaration of failure, but a realization. Like I remember when I stopped protesting, I told my students, like I felt a sense of responsibility. I cannot cheer something that I can't participate in. I cannot sit here and be like, yeah, or you have to go and do this, and I'm sitting and I'm not participating. So I remember the moment when I said, this is not only dangerous, I don't think it's leading to anywhere. It was my responsibility to say that I burnt out. It's also part of activism. It's not only like that I continue today posting, messages in favor of something that I'm not part of. So it's okay to stop, I think, for a
Exactly.
while.
Because you all have to go with what you believe in, and if what you believe in is not working anymore, you just change your perspective.
Exactly.
So how can universities like AUB and others better support scholars who are doing relational and activist work?
Yeah, so I'll step outside a little bit of Lebanon and AUB to say that having moved or done my sabbatical in various parts of the world and now being in Europe, and this is not only a Lebanon discussion, many universities are like many university administrators realize that this work is important, right? They understand. But how do you then measure it, quantify it? What does that mean? So I think like probably there are three things. I mean, when I say university, it's like we're talking about something abstract. Universities are made of people. So a chair, a professor, a PhD advisor, what can they do is like first create the space to think about not how to think about research impact not as an afterthought, but as something embedded within the career, right? Like, what are we doing? Who do we talk to? Are there homeless people outside, our campus? Are there people in poverty? Is there violence? Where do we stand in this? And second, what they can do is not trample, or stop the people who are doing this institutional work of flattening the hierarchy and working on relationships, is not to ridicule them, because there was a lot of ridicule. I talk about the positives, in my experience, but there were a lot of like, especially older male professors that were like ridiculing me. And this is why I always insist and say I was the first to be tenured. I was very successful. I was, publishing really well because I was good in what they wanted me to be good at. It just didn't look like. So don't trample people who want to, lend a hand, whose work is in co-creation, whose suffering that they're working on doesn't come from a research question, comes from maybe their lived experience, comes from their family. So create this space for that kind of, and a lot of, feminist scholarship has outlined this, right? What is epistemic privilege? What is lived experience? And so, yeah, create the space for where do we stand? Where does our research impact the community? Second, are there people doing already this work? If we're not going to help them, at least we don't ridicule them, because this is a form of knowledge. And I think the third thing is to start including in the teaching and the curricula this form of knowledge production as a valid, as a legitimate form, right? I've published something in Times Higher Education. It's a legitimate form of knowledge. I did my PhD in a good university. This is not something fringe. This is something that should be central. I think that would be important.
Right, exactly. And are there lessons from Lebanon that apply to academic communities facing crises elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, I don't like to say this. Yeah, of course. At all levels. I mean,
Right,
yeah, at all levels. And the teaching and what you include in the teaching, in the spirit of why the research is done. And again, in the space to do this kind of work and not to minimize it.
right.
Yeah.
And as we discussed, I think a lot of universities now are waking up to this form of activism and actually trying to support it.
And they're suffering everywhere. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Lebanon is quite extreme in its creeping crisis,
Right.
but they're suffering everywhere. Yeah, where I live in Spain, there's no discrimination, there's no racism, there's no inequality. I mean, there is everywhere, right? Any community today can look and say, how can the university contribute better while also advancing its agenda of research and teaching?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And what would you say to academics who feel overwhelmed, powerless, or unsure whether their work can make a difference?
take to everyone. Honestly, is to find like-minded people because I go back to my co-authors. My co-authors became not just my mentors, but my friends, and together we synthesize this healing. It's not like, you don't meet and you say, how we're gonna heal today. But I would say, the sense of overwhelm is less when it is shared. Part of the processes we talk about healing is like recognizing, witnessing, like you need to name it. So even saying to three people in your campus, I feel overwhelmed, I'm not sure about my impact, how can we do this better? It can create at least a way of venting and then maximum a lifelong friendship, that allows you to build with others. I think that's important. And I think also it's important sometimes this doesn't represent my co-authors. It's important sometimes to be confrontational and to say, the hell with it. Some metrics don't apply. I want to make a difference elsewhere. Like academia can become very isolating. It's important to publish, but it's also important to have a hobby and to think outside the box and maybe to attend something, if an academic is feeling overwhelmed, okay, fine. Where are the people who are making the difference? Where do you want to be? It could be attending theater, it could be a movie, it could be going to a rally, right? Just getting yourself out of that, especially as young, junior professors. It's like getting out yourself from this carved pathway.
Right.
Yeah, I think that helps me a lot. Is sometimes conform and sometimes just like the hell with it.
Because one thing I think you learn with time is you want to do things that fulfill you and maybe fulfill things you are passionate about, because it's not only about promotion and publishing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, it's like what kind of promotion, right? Because I talk about all the good mentors, but there were a few horrible ones, few of them, and people were saying like, this is what you have to
Can
do.
you name names? I'm kidding.
No, I don't want no. So it's normal. It's not unusual what I've been through, but the advice was basic. I can tell you the advice, don't do this, do like me.
Yeah.
So also it's important to know if I'm a junior professor, if I want to get promoted. Okay, we're gonna publish the 4, 5, 10 things we're supposed to publish. What does my promotion path look like? So I think also there is novelty. There are new types of journals emerging. Universities across the world need to report on impact. So can you think of an impact project that makes you happy? So I think that's important.
Exactly. And as we approach the end, I was going to ask you, what does this paper teach us about the role of the university in times of collective trauma?
That the university can be a site of collective healing when the trauma is collective, when it hits many, many people. It can transform teaching into a space of healing and writing and witnessing something rather than being silent, oppressing oneself, pushing yourself to go back to business and rendering the healing only to an individual realm. I think universities can be a site. They are convening sites. What is a university in a philosophical sense? No, it's a convening space,
Right.
right? It's a space to be and to think. And who said that in a moment of collective trauma, the being and the thinking and the teaching should go back to being hierarchical and because I told you so. And particularly these days with the digital revolution, with the AI, students have access to knowledge. It's solidarity that they need and then being seen and being encouraged. So I think it teaches us the university can be. It was like that for us, honestly. And I wouldn't be on my feet today if it wasn't for that experience.
Right. Right.
Literally, yeah, I would not be on my feet.
Yeah. Yeah. If listeners remember one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
That thank you, Dr. Diab, for reaching out. It's also when you leave the country also can be quite isolating. And so to remember that injustice that happens to a lot of people, to a collective, needs a lot of people to respond. And most injustices stemming from, political failure, as we have in Lebanon, are affecting the public. So you're never alone, I would say. You're never alone.
Right. That's important.
Yeah. It's
So
not the same as yeah, it's not the same as losing something individual and showing up at work sad. It is an injustice that happened to all of us, who it needs all of us to think about.
and to eat from it. So, Carmen, what are your future plans, I guess, now that you are in Barcelona, and what are your future plans?
Yeah, so I'm taking all of this with the co-authors and advisors and friends and trying to putting this into practice. So I run an organization, it's called Soltara out of Barcelona. And we specialize in creating learning and leadership development that's catered to people in academia, people in businesses and civil society, to be able to open these conversations and build competencies that respond not just to crisis and disaster, but to transformation. I still teach and write part-time, but I'm full-time practice in the practice world today.
Great. Carmen, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and hopefully we'll hear more about your consulting agency and the work it's doing around the world.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. It was healing.
Thanks.